I've just hit it now.
Okay.
So I hope this is all right with everybody. We are recording the discussion as well as taking notes here. Thanks for the reminder, Pasquale. And Pedro, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Bonnie. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending this stakeholder workshop meeting for the Gecko project. I will be facilitating the discussion in this phase, and just as an introduction in terms of process. We will go through 4 different questions or issues, and for each issue, I will set the scope. I will paste the question on the chat box, so we don't have to come in and out of the slide presentations. Just check on the chat box. I will let you know when the question is there. So we will address 4 topics, 1 topic at a time. And for each topic, on each topic, we will have a discussion of somewhere between 10 to 14, 15 minutes. And for each discussion, I will very shortly, as I mentioned, introduce the question, ask any questions that you may have about this issue, and then facilitate the discussion. My colleague Pasquale Cancellara will be taking the notes. As Bonnie mentioned, he will be taking these notes in this mural board that you can see on your screen right now. If you want to, you can check on the chat box the link to this mural board and also the password. You can log in, and if you would like, during the discussion, not only can you see, as a matter of transparency, the notes that we're taking, but you can also add your own. Feel free to add your own notes at any time. Regarding the purpose of this discussion, so Polis, so within one of the deliverables of the Gecko project is a set of guidelines. We have to come up with guidelines. And we decided to gear these guidelines mainly to the use of local and regional and metropolitan transport authorities and governments, because they are the ones on the front line who have to deal with the arriving disruptive innovations in the transport sector. And it's better to provide them with some guidelines that can help them deal with these issues than rather, expect them to read all the Gecko deliverables one at a time to figure out the answers. And what we're looking for with this discussion and with these guidelines, but specifically with the discussion today, is for some insight or for some advice or for some, informal exchange of views that we cannot get from literature reviews or from scientific research. And specifically, your opinions. We're recording this, but we're not thinking of, writing everything down in stone. Feel free to have an informal conversation. And the idea, as I mentioned, is to see what comes up during the discussion of these issues. So the 4 questions will be in this order: transport justice and social inclusion, fair labor practices, protecting and serving the backbone, and encouraging active mobility. So as I mentioned, for each of these questions, I will paste on the chat box the first issue, and then we'll take the discussion from there. Regarding the process, does anybody want to ask a question? I assume silence means everybody's okay with this. So here goes the first question. I hope this works. Give me just a second. Okay, so transport justice and social inclusion. At the chat box. Away from the city center, many suburbanites are either locked into car dependency and highly sensitive to restrictions on car use, or captive users of public transport who dream of buying a car. Accelerating the shift to sustainable mobility requires providing these populations with affordable options. So take a few moments to think about this, probably a dilemma you've been faced with as well. And what we'll be trying to discuss is, between the public and the public sector and those who are, coming up with new mobility services, what are the converging interests? What are the conflicting interests? And from us here, what kind of advice can we give to those in the front line? Would somebody like to start?
Yeah, may I give
Sure.
some of my maybe comments? I think for transport justice and social inclusion is quite important issue so far. I think for the convergent interests is we all concerned about the equity problem because social like a rural area, they all have their like accessibility rights to access to all the like visit friends or to visit hospital or go to school because they also concerned about the kind of social mobility. So if for the public sector, we concerned about that, but for the public transport service, they may not have enough capacity to deal with like rural area problem. But for the private sector, if they can provide that, I think that's a convergent conflict interest. They can solve the problem for the public sector. Maybe they can't. And also the convergent conflicts, maybe we can use like a local capacity, like local vehicle and local drivers. If they just stay in local and the private sector, they can group their energy to provide service. Maybe they can give some benefits for the local, because rural area like in Taiwan, their revenue is lower than urban area. So if they can use their car, maybe share their vehicle to provide transport service, they can earn some money. It's kind of another way of like a Uber service in rural area. But I think there's still conflicting interests for this kind of service because how can we confine the rural area, this kind of not so regulated service without to intervene the like taxi or the other transit or paratransit service. That's maybe conflicting interests we need to define between like normal service and also the like maybe innovative service in rural area. Okay, that's
so you're talking from the perspective of a regulator. How do we deal with this?
Yes.
Not so regulated. So we want informality, but then it's not so regulated. And how do we regulators deal with it? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, for our experience, we just implemented a new innovative service in rural area. We call inclusive shared mobility in rural area. So we hired rural area, their local people, and to group a vehicle fleet, and they use their vehicle and use their local the localized human resource and the vehicle to provide service. Yeah. And but this kind of service, when we introduced that 2 years ago, it's not legal. It's illegal. And then we legalized it last year. Yeah. So it's a new service. And local people, they are happy because they got more revenue. And the rural area, some places, they are inaccessible to the public transit. And now they can more easily, more conveniently to access to school and to hospital for seniors. Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot. So who else wants to go next? Thanks a lot. Who wants to go next? I see Mark, Gregor. I see literally because I can see your face on the video. So maybe for Sergio.
This is Sergio. I was I was trying to play with the middle, but I don't know if I did it correctly.
Don't worry.
I just put something on the side of conflicting interests, but I'm not sure if that is a conflicting interest.
Okay.
Well, nevertheless, I fully agree with this statement, and it is true that we need to provide affordable options to those suburban areas. And that includes as well, I have seen somebody has added also the rural areas, and that is also true. I think a critical point is precisely the critical mass to make all these additional mobility services profitable from the point of view of managing the operations. Sometimes when you have a little population and very, very spread out, operations to deal with all these new mobility services becomes really, really difficult from the point of view of relocation of either cars or e-scooters or mopeds, and then also distances can be longer, and that's why, for instance, and I'm talking now about the local experience in Madrid, most of these mobility operators always want to deploy their services within the city centers. And whenever you even provide very easy conditions like, yes, but why don't you go to this suburban area? They really don't want to go because their business model becomes really unaffordable. So I'm not sure if that is a converging point or the opposite, the other way around, or just an advice. But I don't see an easy solution, basically, because it's that the problem is that most cities grow not in a very, at least the examples I know, in a very compact way. So it's really difficult to just shift mobility to these new mobility solutions.
Yeah.
And it is true that here in Madrid is a hot topic. Restrictions or people is really sensitive to that matter.
Yeah, it's in many cities in those governing central urban areas are basically locked into the decisions of others who are basically dictating how the commute will happen. And so we basically, when we're dealing with the center, we have to deal with what comes in, and we have very little power to affect what happens outside in the suburbs.
Yeah, so as far as and now due to the pandemic, I see a very dangerous trend because a big part of population it's shifting to private car. I think today in Madrid we have just 8% less traffic than in the pre-pandemic situation, but the economic activity and the mobility itself is really lower. I mean, a lot of people keep working from home, and many places are still closed. So I see a very dangerous trend, because once you know the power of driving your own car, it's very difficult to go back to public transport or.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know.
Anybody else has put stuff on the board, or anybody else would like to share some views on this point?
May I react, please?
Of course.
I don't see how I can raise my hand in this Zoom. Reacting on what Sergio said, if you leave it on up to the market without a real cooperation with the local authority, then of course the market is going where there's a business case. I think we have a very good example in Brussels on how the Brussels government works together with car sharing operators. There's a regulation, a legal regulation that operators have access to public parking spots or there are car sharing stations, if operators go to different places, not only to the commercially interesting places, but also to that kind of neighborhoods where there are more issues further away from the city center. And you have to look beyond the business case, but see what is a public service, what is the business case, and think about the collaboration between the public role and what the operators can offer. And then you can if you can fund or support private operators if they go to this other areas also, or to other target groups. This can work perfectly together.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Nice example. Anybody wants to add anything?
Yes. Hello, this is Gregor speaking. Hi.
Hi.
Nice to meet you. Nice to see you again. Yeah, actually 2 points I totally agree regarding the efficiency and the thresholds that you have to reach to make a mobility service profitable. I think there is also the question, because we as Triply are talking to, for example, shared mobility providers, let's say we call it micro public transit. It's like, so to say, ride sharing, like a taxi, like taxi pooling or ride pooling, however you want to call it. We call it micro public transportation in Austria, also in Germany, I guess. And the big issue here is, of course, how to get enough customers to make it profitable. But there's a huge, I mean, the aspect we have to differ is that, of course, a public provider has other economical metrics than a private one. This is quite important, and which also leads me to the aspect of how those different companies could cooperate. And we had once a very interesting talk at UITP, at the mass work group at UITP, and I think the question is, there's a very good analogy that you have the red, like typical analogy in business, red ocean, blue ocean. And so red ocean is the market that you already have conquered, and blue ocean is the market you haven't conquered. And for example, if the public transportation companies make marketing towards people who already have a yearly ticket, then it's like fishing in the red ocean. So the ocean is already fished. You already have those people as customers. So what we really want to approach are the people who drive cars. And that's so interesting. This is really difficult for public transportation companies to make marketing for people who drive cars. That's really interesting that they do not manage, obviously, to talk to them, or it's difficult for them. And the next step is that public transportation companies seem to have or are reluctant to cooperate with private companies like Uber, other car sharing companies, and so on. And I also get the reasons why they are reluctant. There are, for example, the social aspects regarding work laws and so on. Of course, this is an issue. But on the other hand, I think it's important to take those services into account, because we need to appeal to car drivers, and we will not be able to bring a car driver onto a bicycle in 1 month, not even half a year, probably not even in 1 year, perhaps not in 3 years, but maybe in 4 or 5 years. So what we have to do is baby steps. So in my opinion, the best would be to offer something to a car driver which is the most approximate to a car, which is maybe a very nice taxi or a very nice ride pooling option. And then if he gets used to that, maybe one day he will take a car sharing service. And if he gets used to that, maybe one day he will take a public transportation service if there is let's say, a problem with a car sharing company, and they tell him, please, today don't take a car sharing car, but take the subway. Then maybe he will get in touch with the subway or she, yeah? And maybe then one day they will also take a bike. But I think the important is that the importance is to take small baby steps, and therefore also public transportation companies have to work together with specific new services, maybe private ones, maybe they offer it themselves, different ways of doing that. But I think the critical thought is that people will not change from private car to bicycle or public transportation in overnight. Yeah, you have to have steps.
Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up
yeah.
question to Gregor? Sorry about that. I'm just wondering, it sounds like you're talking about the carrot side, so encouraging them to do something else. But if we're talking about regulations, what about the sticks? And could you make the car driving unattractive through regulation? Do you have something to say about that? It sounds like you're only talking about making other things attractive, but not making the car unattractive.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. Oh, certainly, yeah. I mean, personally, I'm riding a bike, so if we would reduce the car lanes, for example, instead of building new lanes, of course, this is one step. I mean, you could really make a case and say, let's make it difficult for car drivers to use the car, sure. But also there, I would use baby steps. For example, I talked to a friend last week, and we thought about, for example, mopeds, like motorcycles. Why not start with them? Like saying, okay, we're not allowed to sell mopeds or motorcycles after 25, for example. Because I think the lobby for mopeds and motorcycles is not as strong as the lobby for cars, for example. Probably there are overlappings, but this would be easier to conduct.
Okay. So I will. Thanks a lot, Gregor. So I will take what Gregor said to introduce the next issue on the chat box, and it's tags in. So it's protecting and serving the backbone. Mass public transport carries large numbers of passengers, has deep influence in land use, and, as became evident throughout the pandemic, is what keeps running when the crisis comes. It is the backbone of the urban mobility system, but it has limitations regarding capillarity and off-peak periods. By capillarity here, we mean, getting into those areas where you don't get as many passengers. So it's really not very sustainable from an economic point of view to run, the classic bus service there, or to build a subway station. So the question here would be, so we do need to protect public transport. Is a public infrastructure we can rely on, but we do need to grow. If we want people, we need to grow not only the capacity of public transport, but also its ability to run better service off-peak and in lower density areas. So the question is, how can public and private sector work on this? What are the conflicting interests? Where are they? Where could they be converging? And what advice do we have for those on the ground? So we've touched on some of these issues already.
Yeah. Hello. May I talk something about this question? Okay. I think for me, for our experience, I think the convergent interests is how can we integrate maybe public transport service and the other shared mobility service. For example, in Taiwan, in the past 2 years, we can see that like a shared, not scooter, not motorbike, moped, is popular for motorcycles in Taiwan. So we got new, disruptive, innovative services, shared motorcycles. So the shared motorcycle, like in urban area, their turnover rate can over 5 to 6 times per day. So it's quite gradually become popular. So, but the service is individual. There are 3 companies run the shared motorcycle service in Taipei City and New Taipei City, but their service is individual. They didn't connect to the public transport service. So our mass project is trying to integrate them. So if they can understand, like the motorcycle, they can fill the gap between the public transport and the last mile and first mile service, first mile, and the shared mobility can be the whole transportation system, part of the systems, and they can fill the gap. During the midnight, there's not public transport service, they can use the shared motorbike, shared motorcycle, and the other shared mobility. So that's, I think, the convergent interest. If they can see this kind of market, then really trigger the behavior change. Just a former last question, we understand if we can give some like benefits or incentive to the users. And but the conflicting interest we see that is who will own the data for the mass service, because all the shared mobility companies, they concerned about their membership and the data, because through the data they can understand the behavior where the users come, regions and the destinations, what's the background or social status of their users, and how can they to incubate their users or their market. So can they have the full vision to like because the private vehicle users is still at large, and how can we attract private vehicle users but not to attract public transport users? Like for me, I don't have any vehicle, not only car or a motorcycle in my family. So I always use public transport. But when we have the shared motorcycle, sometimes I give up bus trips, ridership, but use bus and use motorcycle, share motorcycle instead. So I think it's easy to become the shared mobility to their market is more like transferred from the public transport, but not the private vehicle. Okay, that's my opinion. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Who wants to go next? I see a lot of hands in the air. Louis Chin, is that your hand?
Yeah, that's me.
Wonderful.
Yeah. All right. Okay. I just want to share some
I just saw a
experiences.
hand.
Yeah, I've been implementing car sharing and trying to change behavior to get people into shared mobility. So I think, but one of the things I always share with regulators is, I think at the end of the day, I do agree that public transport has to be our backbone. Yeah. All the others are just to complement the public transport system. So then, of course, it boils down to the quality and the safety of public transport system. First of all, people must be able to trust the public transport system will take care of my needs well first, because the rest is just supporting them. So anything that we want to, any other new mobility services and all this, like before I go and implement this, first thing I always look at is what is the quality of public transport system. Is people feel safe or feel they are comfortable taking it, riding it? Because if they're not even comfortable with that, they can forget about the rest. They will always go back to the car, right? Because this is a normal human behavior. So we cannot run away from this. Let's be practical about this kind of things. And then the other things that I always tell people, at the end of the day, all whatever your mobility needs or new mobility services that you're going to introduce, we must understand what is the behavior of the city. What is the changing trend of the city? Like, for example, this pandemic has made us think about a few things. You know, I mean, what happens if people continue to work from home? Then what happens if with all this public infrastructure that we have built and created to bring people to office most of the time, how is that going to change in the future, right? And for example, even in car sharing, the behavior, the usages, like when I first introduced car sharing and now, people has changed. You know, it used to be people take cars for grocery shopping here in Singapore. That was number one. But this has really dropped to number 3 or 4 because people go do online shopping and getting things delivered to their home. So this is one of these kind of trends. So whatever this new mobility or all this, we got to even think a little bit further. Where I'm trying to get at is, whatever this future mobility needs that we're going to do, we have to integrate with the overall urban planning. You know, like in Singapore, they are trying very hard to have staggered working hours. So to cater for the demand and supply, because public transport, if everybody going to, because one of the issues is everybody trying to go to work at the same time, and then after that, all of a sudden you have a big lapse during off-peak hours, and because then your train services become inefficient and all that. So in Singapore, we try to start with different staggered working hours. Some people start at different hours so that the train rides are less heavier. And or they try to give incentive for people. Like if you can board the bus or the train before 7 o'clock, you get it free. So you go to work a little bit easier. We call it the early bird specials, Yeah.
The early bird special.
Yeah,
if you can board the bus before 7, you ride free.
Yeah. So that, encourage people to start a little bit earlier. So that you can start work a little bit. So we at the same time, we work with corporates to allow people, have this kind of flexi hours. Because at the end of the day, we got to manage this kind of demand and supply, right? I mean, this is a real problem. That I believe when I go to every city, I see that. So sometimes we got to try all these kind of little things to make things work. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Who goes next? Pasquale, is that your hand?
No, just I wanted to add that, I found it very interesting, this last point. And in fact, also in Europe, Milan, for example, has scheduled already these different hours for commuting, and as a way to maintain an acceptable service. Now that physical distancing is so important. And let's see if this will be kept, because I think it's a very wise and logical approach, because moving everyone, if you move everyone at the same hour, of course, then this will impact on commuting and public transport and how we move in the city. So there is also an experience then in Europe.
So what I get from what colleagues have been saying so far is that on this specific issue of protecting and serving the backbone, is that number one, public transport has to be comfortable and safe. People have to feel it is an attractive option, or they just will keep their cars or will go for other options. But the question remains here, and that's an important question, and that new mobility services, should be complementing and mass public transport. Now, here's a question: how can we make sure that that there is cooperation between new mobility services and not a competition between these new services and the public transport service? Anybody has an advice on that?
If I may, I think that collaboration, one of the main starting points is about sharing the users, which may not mean exactly sharing the data, but at least trying to have this integrated approach that a public transport user may become at once also a new mobility service user if you make it easy for that person. That is the idea we are trying to steer from EMT Madrid through our mobility as a service platform. So I guess maybe one element that can help in this regard is pushing it from the public sector, or steering it from the public sector. As generally public sector, public transport operators or public transport authorities are not business driven in terms of making a monetary revenue out of it, but for the sake of urban planning, etc., for the sake of all. So our own experience has shown that there is kind of a willingness to cooperate, and we have always used this motto, sharing users, and trying to set a minimum framework to make that happen, which may mean sharing some type of data, but just maybe little data. And we are in this process. I guess it's fundamental that we have pros and cons, and we all must be aware of giving something in return. So maybe public transport authorities or city authorities should become more open to let these companies help in providing mobility services. But on the other hand, private mobility operators must be aware that they need to fully fulfill and comply with city requirements in terms of, complying with parking rules, complying with service rules or availability or attention service to clients on a whole bunch of issues. Otherwise, it can become a bit messy, and that is what it happened initially in Madrid with the arrival of so many e-scooter companies that created really a literal chaos in the streets. Now it seems that it has come back to more normality, and we are still in that process.
Okay, thanks. I'll have to push us to the next topic, if that is okay. I'll just insert it into the chat box. Let's talk about fair labor practices. So the question is that some new mobility services have been created by highly qualified tech professionals with generous pay and bonuses and benefits, but they're at the same time generating thousands of low-paid, no-benefit individual entrepreneurs, as they call them. So this externalization of labor costs provides these new mobility services with a competitive advantage, but it has side effects. What about the side effects? If they're externalizing these costs, who's picking up the tab? Let me just ask you a question first. Do you feel this is our business, that fair labor practices are something that we as transport professionals should care about? Fair labor practices in the transport sector. You can think wisely about it.
I see Pasquale's hand up.
Oh, okay.
And I think Gregor was indicating something as well.
Oh, no, that was by mistake. I don't know, it wasn't, yeah.
And Gregor.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I'm totally of the opinion that we have to include this topic into our strategy, because we want to provide a service which is maintained by people who like to do it, or also feel well doing that, or feel fairly treated while doing that. I mean, mobility is a sector with quite a lot of dangers regarding traffic and so on. I think it's very important to have workers that are fairly paid regarding all the social topics, of course. Besides them, of course. I think because I have some experience with startups regarding that question. For example, I also worked for a company in Vienna, or we built a company in Vienna who deliver via bike, like bike couriers. And there was the same discussion also, because the way that we paid them was in a sort of way like a loophole or a gray market situation. And we had a lot of discussions, and I think what maybe could help is a sort of public funding, because it's quite difficult to introduce a new service into a market without competitive pricing, I guess. And as soon and if the public maybe funds or like supports those new mobility services until the public or until the citizens have adopted it, and then I hope so, it will be able for us to build or to introduce normal prices or fair prices, so that we can also pay fairly. Maybe like there needs to be a sort of start ignition for the whole circle.
So some sort of support for these individual entrepreneurs, for example, from the part of the state,
yes.
Until the business attains some sort of a critical mass that allows it to pay better and to provide better conditions.
Yes, exactly.
Can I ask a follow-up question, Gregor?
Yes,
How would you determine then who would get the public funding? Can anybody just come up with a service and say, I want funding, or how would you do that?
Yeah, that's a very good question regarding, let's say, how you call it, like a checklist, perhaps, or certain requirements you have to fulfill. We once also talked with, it's again regarding ride sharing, ride pooling and micro public transportation services, that you have, for example, you are allowed to serve in a very, for example, we had this topic, what our colleague told us, that all of those services want to provide the service in the city center, but not in the outskirts due to the customer density.
Yeah.
Of course, that makes sense. So you could say, okay, you are allowed to work in this, let's say, sweet spot areas with a lot of customers, but then you have to provide at least 20% maybe for free, or let's say very cost efficient for handicapped people maybe, or let's say elderly people, that you have a sort of combined requirement set. Okay, you are allowed to go with your taxi into the first district or the inner district of the city, where all the tourists are, where all the business people are, but at the same time you have to provide 20% of your service for free, or let's say for a very fair price, to elderly or and so on, special needs, for example.
How does that relate with this labor issue?
Oh no, it was regarding the follow-up question of Bonnie.
Okay.
Yeah, that they have to, if you want funding, you have to provide certain social benefits to the community with your service.
Okay.
And regarding the payment, I only see two options: that either we tolerate certain, let's say, not so optimal working situations, or we fund it with public money.
Okay. Any other comments on this topic? If anybody thinks that there's obviously no right answers, we're exploring issues. Does anybody think that it is not our role as transport professionals to deal with this issue? This is not a trick question. It's an honest question.
I think it's a role of the transport experts also to raise this issue. Sometimes new operators are coming in certain markets with going under the price or with certain labor practices, and they are disrupting the market and they have impact on the market, and then maybe 1 or 2 years later regulation is changing, or they are leaving the market, but then they have killed certain parts of the market, like the image of public transport or some other type of shared mobility operators. So it's very important to raise this issue very proactively and not as a reaction on certain players.
Mm-hmm. So they come in with very competitive, let's say, prices. They disrupt the market. They kill part of the offer, and then later when they move out, what they killed remains dead. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and killing is a very strong word, but they have an impact on the reputation of new mobility services. They have impact on the reputation of like certain operators, public transport operators, and they create sometimes an image that it's easy to put a fleet of cars or certain vehicles in the market, and without showing the whole business case or the circumstance, the labor practices, and then they create an image that other type of operators are too expensive or too old-fashioned or whatever, and
they bring down the prices. Yes.
Yeah, not only the prices, but the image in general also.
So we put this interestingly in conflicting interests, but I sort of see it, Angelo, I would say maybe from your perspective as somebody that offers a high quality service, you would say that it's a converging interest between you and the public sector, that there are fair labor practices, that's something that the services can continue and so on. That so maybe what's converging or conflicting may depend on the kind of private sector company that's offering the services.
Yes, yes, you can say it like that.
Okay, maybe I just have a question to ask everybody. I mean,
Yes.
in Singapore here, one of the issues we have with public transport, we have a difficulty trying to get people to drive our buses. Labor shortage is one of the biggest issues here in Singapore. That's why we are looking at autonomous vehicles and all that to hopefully it help us to resolve some of these issues. But do you all face the same thing there? Because this will actually has an impact on these labor practices because I mean, we are trying to move up the salary levels of our bus drivers so that we can attract more bus captains, more people to take on to move into public transport itself because we are quite short of that such labors. Yeah.
So
how
what,
about
what is your question, Luis? Sorry.
So I mean, do you face such issues? Because in this case, in Singapore, it can't resolve by itself because of the supply and demand. The fact that we have short of this kind of drivers. So they have to increase the salary to make it attractive for them to come into this kind of sector. Right?
Does anybody have a comment for that?
Yeah. Sorry. My comment is I think the labor have to have the same. I think the employers have to have the same interest with the employee their laborers because new mobility service like share mobility like Uber or like a Foodpanda, their labor is not the same as like legalized recruit by the company. They are like freelancer. So that's why it's caused some safety issue and also maybe cause the like low salary issue. So I think they still have to be legalized to be recruited by the owners. Then they can have the fair to treat, and they have the same as the other transportation operators provide offers to their employers. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Before we go, I'm just gonna share. We have like 6 minutes to discuss this final issue. I just put it in the chat box. It's about encouraging active mobility. Walking is the most environmental friendly mode of transport, with cycling a close second. We need to reduce transport carbon emissions, but in our sedentary society, we also need more active mobility to improve physical and mental health. Now, how do public authorities who want to do this, who want to get people walking and cycling, how do they deal at the same time with this fast-growing number of offers for the first and last mile? Aha. Luis.
Okay, sorry, maybe I can share with what Singapore, because this is active mobility, coincidentally, is Singapore's land transport master plan. May I put that into the land transport master plan, one of the key backbone to our land transport master plan for 2040, if I'm not wrong. So because Singapore thinks very far ahead, I think it's 2030. So because of our aging populations and all that, that's right, because it will relate to health issues and all that and stuff. So Singapore is tying up the whole thing, how this whole thing is going to fit into the big picture. That's also, they are building, like, for example, more bicycle every day in the news. I can share this more. I mean, like today, they just shared another news, like there will be more bicycle lanes for you to cycle and all that. And they also try to build shelter walkways because Singapore is being in a tropical climate, the weather issue, walking in the rain and all that. So they are trying to have covered walkways for you to take public transport. So they are trying to boost up all these kind of facilities so that, people can encourage people towards that, but they put that as part of their plan, the core plan in 2040. So that, that people, in a way is, I would say, going back to your even the previous one, I think is giving recognition to that we are serious about this and we're going to make that happen. I think sometimes, a lot of times, the issue is you end up with like a lip service for to get votes. Whereas in unlike in Singapore's case, because the fact that we know that government is quite serious about it and they're building all this infrastructure to cater for such things. Of course, Singapore is a small country. It's easy for them to implement things like this. But what I'm trying to get at is part of the plan. And because of the aging population and all that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anybody want to add something?
Yeah, may I add some what we have done to this issue? So I think first, like in Taiwan, we have high usage of motorcycle. So the past decades, we are trying hard to remove the motorcycle parking on the sidewalks to make the sidewalk more walkable. And the second is, I think, is how to encourage the like cycling. So we introduced the shared bike. The shared bike also make more progress to electric share bike. So that make the share bike more easily to manipulate or to use at different like lane shape. And also we integrate our share bike fare with the public transport. So if you use buy the monthly ticket, then they can have like last mile use the share bike with free. And also we also introduced like a motorcycle parking charge. So the parking charge, they can make the motorcycle parking more discipline, have more discipline on our motorcycle parking, and we reserve more space for walking, and also we build some like a cycling path in city center and also like in the riverside for leisure activity. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Gregor, you're holding up your hand. That means that having helped startups come up with solutions for the first and the last mile,
yeah, well,
you've just found a conflicting interest.
Well, yeah, I think one of the most important, like if let's assume what are the potential passengers for active mobility, like walking, for example. Of course, people who drive a car, I guess it would be quite low, the probability that they will park their car further away and then walk. I think there's quite a low probability. And if you have people who use public transportation, then I think perhaps the probability is higher. But then the reason again is, why not go with especially in the city with very well-developed public transportation, the question would be why somebody should leave the bus 1 or 2 stations earlier, especially if there's a time restraint and the weather is bad. So this is the worst case. But let's say there's a nice weather and I have time, then somebody could go off the bus earlier and walk the rest of the way to the work or back home. And in that case, I think I think a colleague said it before, recognition or incentivization could be a topic, or just awareness, building awareness probably. So it would be more a question of communication than of offerings, because certainly the options for offerings regarding walking are quite small. What should you offer? So probably communication, incentivization would be the ways to build awareness. And for example, you could say, okay, today start with once a week going out of the bus 1 stop earlier, and the second week go out of the bus 2 stops earlier, maybe like some sort of challenges.
But how does a city deal with with 10 e-scooter companies who want to say we've got solutions for the first and the last mile, and the city wants no, on the first and the last mile we want people to walk. How do we direct the private initiative away from the first and the last mile? I know this might seem heretic, considering all the conversation going for the past 2 or 3 years, but nevertheless, how would you?
It's a good question. It's a good question.
Startup, if it's not the first and the last mile, where can you look at?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think, to be honest, I don't think that these micro scooters are cannibalizing on the people who walk, because I mean, I'm using scooters since early stage, and when I use the scooters, and I'm a quite healthy person, I would say, and I like to walk. I don't use scooters instead of walking usually. I don't think that the average person who uses a scooter would walk instead if there wouldn't be a scooter, to be honest. For example. I think it's, I think it's more of a health issue or a public health issue, how to communicate with the citizens so that active mobility becomes, I think active mobility perhaps is more of a general health communication issue than a mobility issue. I would maybe see it that way, or maybe I would combine health initiatives with mobility initiatives and therefore also combine public resources from both ministries, for example, to foster that perspective.
Okay, thanks a lot, Gregor. Does anybody want to add something on this topic or on any of the previously discussed topics? We have a couple of minutes just to pick up last comments. Any last comment, advice, insight?
Pedro, may I react? So,
of course, Angelo.
Yeah. So I see it already in this exercise, the terminology you are using. You see public transport, backbone, and then encourage active mobility. It's like not that important. It's a choice of terminology, but very important in whole transport planning, I think. For me, active mobility is very, very important. It's on top. It's about public health, but it's also about space, public space. It's about environment. It can also strengthen public transport. And then the other discussion just before, you see it as often you're talking about first mile, last mile. It's much more than first and last mile. So many journeys in urban areas and even in suburban and other areas can be done for 100% with the bicycle, for 100% as walking. So if you don't see it as, if you see it as first, last mile, or as just as to encourage, then you won't give the right priority to it.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I have a colleague, actually my boss. He sometimes comes from Leuven into Brussels, Evo, on a bike.
Yeah, smart choice.
Around, 30-something kilometers. Okay, so thank everybody. Thank you everybody for your precious comments. The floor is back. The floor, the screen, the group, the collective love. Back to you, Bonnie. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Take it over, yeah. Thanks, Pedro, and thanks everybody for the input. I can see there's a lot to be said under advice in most cases. I think it's difficult, or it's sometimes hard to allocate something as a converging interest or a conflicting interest.
Yeah.
So we'll probably have to go back and look at the advice and see where things fit together. But as always, it's been really interesting and insightful to get the different perspectives. And I think also Angela right at the end there pointing out just the terminology of say public transport and walking and cycling and how these fit together. We come back to questions of land use. So, I mean, our topic in general is the regulation of new mobility, but we realize that it touches on so many different factors that it's difficult to sort of limit to what we're actually focusing on. And we recognize that there are overlaps all over the place. So that's the challenge that we're working with. But this has been really helpful for us just to get these perspectives from you on these different topics. And this is going to be Pedro's job now, together with Pasquale, to put this into or to incorporate your input into the document that he's creating about guidelines for governance models. For, I think, all of you, we've invited you to come to a session which is on Thursday afternoon, our time, which is significantly later, I know, in Asia. Some of you also been invited to a session, I think, on Thursday morning. So there are still a couple of things going on. If you're interested in participating in other things, feel free to get in touch with me. We do have another session tomorrow looking at planning into the future. So, and we're looking at a time span of 2040, Lewis. So sort of similar to what you're talking about, what needs to be done in the sort of map going towards 2040. So I'm just going to stay on the call a little bit longer. If anybody's interested in possibly joining us in one of those sessions tomorrow, feel free to stay and let me know, and I can send you an invitation for those as well. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you in other sessions. And of course, you will receive the final documents that are created out of this, so you can see what your input has led to, or how it's contributed to the final products coming out of the Gecko project. Any final words or comments from anybody? Jeff, your hand is up. Is that what we call in our office? We call that a legacy hand, or?
No, it's Lexi hand.
Okay.
Thanks so much. Very glad to join this meeting.
Yeah, thank you for coming. We appreciate you finding the time, and the same goes to everybody. Thanks for taking the time to be here, and we hope to see you in other sessions. And I guess that's all for today. We're right on time. Thanks, Pedro, for walking us through all of this, and thanks everybody else, and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a
Thank
nice
you very
day.
much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Sergio.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Lewis.
Bye everyone.
Bye, Angelo. Thanks for coming.
Say
Bye, Bonnie.
hello to
Ciao.
Michael.
I'll do that.